Yesterday's Berlin Marathon was very interesting from a super shoe standpoint, and there is a bunch to talk about. Adidas had a very mixed day, to say the least, yesterday. On the men's side, they had about the worst possible day they could possibly have. They did not break the world record time. They did not go sub 2. Eliud Kipchoge beat them. Nike beat them at their home race, and their top placing athlete got third place, which is great, but he was wearing a pair of Adios Pro 3s. Not necessarily a great look for the Evo 1. On the women's side, though, completely different story. Asefa had an amazing race, though, she looked so good the entire race that if she was wearing a pair of Adios Pro 3s, she probably would have done about the same. Though it's very clear that she thought that the shoes really helped with how she took them off and kissed them and, really, was hugging them at the end of the race. So she obviously thought in her mind that the shoe gave her an advantage, which maybe it did. But it's also probably, I bet there was a huge bounty that Adidas put out for any athlete that broke a world record, won the race in the Evo 1s, and she did all of that. So kudos to her. She had a great race. We did learn a few things about the Evo 1 that are quite interesting. So remember when we saw this, the shoes approved by World Athletics, and there was a V1 and a V2 of the Evo 1 on this list? Well, we now know what the difference is. So if we looked at this image, I was pointing out that the shoes on the right side of this were probably an early prototype Adios Pro 4. Then there was a V1 and a V2 Evo 1. I wasn't that far off. The shoe with the chartreuse or yellow 3 stripes on it is some sort of prototype of a Adios Pro 4, I'm assuming. And like I said in my last video about the Evo 1, that's probably the shoe that they went back to with the ultra lightweight upper. But look at the outsole. The outsole is basically an Adios Pro 3 outsole, though it looks like it's now one piece. It's not necessarily the two pieces of the thicker rubber under the toes and then the thinner rubber under the forefoot that we do have on the Adios Pro 3. The other two shoes, one is showing a outsole, the one in the middle, it has an outsole that looks like it's a traditional outsole, a piece of rubber glued to the foam, whereas the one all the way to the right is the Evo 1 we saw in all the press images where it has the painted on or sprayed on outsole. What we did learn is that the Evo 1, V1, and V2 are the same shoe. The V1 is the one that Adidas was featuring with the painted on or ultra lightweight outsole, and the V2 is the one with a glued on Continental outsole for wet weather. Otherwise, there's no differences. Now, that V2, I'm assuming probably adds 10 to 20 grams to the weight of the shoe, still makes it lighter weight than a Vaporfly 3, but adds a significant amount because rubber is probably one of the heaviest pieces of a running shoe. But really interesting that there's actually two versions and Adidas is actually planning two versions of these. And that got me thinking about something else. And that something else is I do think we're going to see more of these Evolution Special Edition race shoes. When the Evo 1 first released like 2 weeks ago, I was thinking that, okay, this is Adidas, resurrecting what they could from the Adios Pro 4 program. I went into this on my Evo 1 video. I'll put a link in the description if you want to get the whole story. But they were resurrecting what they could out of that failed program. And they were creating a shoe to really go after the world record or a sub 2 time at Berlin. Now that Berlin's passed and we've seen the amount of athletes in there and we've seen how they were promoting the shoe during Berlin with a lot of the commercials and advertisements all over the place, I do think the Evo 1 is here to stay. And I do think there will probably be a wider release in the spring. And I do think it will be in parallel to the Adios Pro 4 or 5, whatever the next Adios Pro shoe is, 4 or 5. The Evo 1 will coexist with that. And it will be an ultra lightweight, elite level race shoe. I do think there'll be a bigger release of it. I still think it'll be very limited release, and I do think it will be still quite expensive. Maybe it'll stay 500. I'm kind of thinking it probably goes down to 400. I know that's still a lot, but I do think it's gonna they're gonna have to tone it down a little bit for a true consumer release. But until Adidas can really roll the technology, the softer Lightstrike Pro, the new geometry fully into the Adios Pro, we're going to see those two shoes coexist, because now that the elites, there's actually a lot of elites in Berlin, Adidas elites that were running in this shoe, more than I expected. Now that they know that shoe exists, they're not going to want to run in the older shoe. And especially that there's a dry and a wet version of the shoe, I think it's pretty clear that Adidas is really thinking this shoe is going to stay around. And I do think this has implications for the Adios Pro. Now, I would say by the next Adios Pro, again, whether that's the 4 or 5, so whatever we get in the spring next year, the one after that, probably 2025 at this point, I think that shoe will have much of the Evo 1 DNA in it, and then the Evo 1 may go away. I do think this is going to push up the price of super shoes, but I don't think it's the only cause. I think super shoe prices have been going up, and it's because of inflation. Prices of everything are going up everywhere. I think your standard super shoe, like a Vaporfly 3, is going to probably be 260 to 270 USD. And I think that will become the norm from 250. And I think the next tier up, like an Alphafly, the Cloud Echo from On, that sort of tier shoe is going to be 300 USD. And I think something like an Evo 1 or a consumer version of the Evo 1 could probably be 450, 350, 400, somewhere in that range. We'll see. But I do think this is creating a new tier, at least for Adidas, of a super shoe. I do kind of think that we'll see Nike follow suit. But again, I think that this will eventually even out as the technology gets disseminated into whatever's next, because like I've talked about in other videos, I do think there is a evolution happening where we are moving to whatever is next. This super foam carbon plate era of super shoes that we've been in, I think the Evo 1 is the first step in moving to whatever is next. And I've said, I do think there's a big tech shift coming in 2 to 3 years. I think we're seeing the start of it. And yes, it is going to push up prices, but also inflation is pushing up prices. On the Nike front, I think there was 2 observations that I had. Eliud Kipchoge winning in the Alphafly 3. I mean, Eliud is the Alphafly 3. It's almost like we should just call the Alphafly the Kipchoge. It's kind of like the Jordan of running. Just call it the Kipchoge and let it be that, because that's really what that shoe is. That is his legacy. But he looks super smooth on it. And it looks like an interesting shoe. I'm eager to do a product analysis video on it, but I'm waiting for official press release images, all of that from Nike, because I think ultimately a lot of the design flaws of the Alphafly, I think they look like they're solved in the Alphafly 3. So it looks like a better shoe. And we've seen this in a lot of Nike pro and elite level marathoners training a lot more in the Alphafly. Across the board on social media, most Nike athletes or pros, you're seeing them in Alphafly 3s more than you ever would have in Alphafly 2s, or definitely Alphaflys. So that's also interesting, because it seems like the Alphafly 3 is becoming more normalized within Nike's pro and elite level runners for the marathon distance. The other thing that I noticed about Berlin 2023 is that there weren't a lot of Vaporflies around. They were around, but I think we're used to seeing maybe, I don't know, 60% of the field wearing some Vaporfly, and then maybe the other 30% wearing, Adios Pros, and then the other 10% just being a mix of sort of Alphaflies and anything else. But at Berlin, there was actually there was a large range of shoes. There were definitely Vaporflies, mostly Vaporfly 3s. There were a couple of Eliud's Pacers in Vaporfly 2s, but they just weren't as prevalent as we've seen them in the past. So that's also really interesting. We'll see the evolution of that. I'm really curious to see what Nike athletes are wearing in Chicago and New York. I expect a lot of Alphafly 3s, but I'm also curious how many Vaporfly 3s we'll see. Personally, I'm still racing the Vaporfly 3s because I think they're great, but it's curious, this evolution that's going on right now. I want to give Asics some props here because their athlete on the men's side, came in second in a pair of Metaspeed Sky Pluses. I mean, who was talking about Metaspeed Sky Pluses in this conversation the past few weeks for the men's results? The Metaspeed series has been very prevalent on the women's side, but not really on the men's side. It hasn't really been in the conversation of major results. But there they go, the Metaspeed Sky Plus. I was actually quite happy to see that, and it was quite refreshing to see another shoe on the podium, and it was nice to see a Nike Asics Adidas podium at Berlin this year. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you like this kind of content, consider subscribing. You'll see more content like this pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.